questions that you guys might have. So just to reiterate who we are, I'm Greg Brotherton, County Commissioner, and I've worked with Peter Rines a little bit since the beginning of the pandemic. You know, at the very beginning, I was really interested in ventilated spaces, and he had reached out, and I think we got him connected a little bit with the schools, but quite frankly, we didn't do a great job on making ventilation one of our layered mitigations throughout this pandemic. And as we've built more and more tools to combat the pandemic and other airborne pathogens and issues, it sort of fell by the wayside when we had things like vaccines and, you know, Paxlovid, which are so effective. We're all pretty fatigued from the pandemic at this point. Everyone, you know, even my family is. It's a battle to get folks to put a mask on these days, you know, and there's just, we're not built to be in an emergency for, you know, going on 3 years now, and it's really tough. So I reached back out to Peter because there's still a lot of things that we can do that are not tough mitigations, but, you know, we can add more and more, and like a 3-layer mask, it will be more effective. So when I talked to Peter this last time, we also brought in Phil Pilgrim, who has Bueno Systems and is a retired engineer who builds things basically, and they had already been continuing to work on creating CO2 monitors. And I'm a big fan of CO2 monitors. I have one that I take to meetings with me and everything. And while it's that one data point that I get is helpful to inform how when I put a mask on in a crowded space or crack a window or something, it is one data point. And talking to Phil and Peter, I learned a lot about the need for real data collection and analysis before you can come up with this prescription that might be effective in a closed space like a retail business or a restaurant where we have folks sitting down and maskless for long periods of time. So they started developing a program, and we brought in Finn River as a retail business that was really interested in some of these issues. So we have, I think Eric is still with us, but he's in transit today at the airport, as Arlene said. So he'll pop on if he's still able to talk a little bit about Finn River's motivations and interests in kind of engaging with this service. But really, we're going to take some time, and Peter's going to walk us through ventilation. And I'll tell you my ventilation 101. Open the window up high and get some sort of fresh air coming in down low, and that takes care of a lot of it. But it's a complicated issue, and we're gonna dive into it. So let's see. And one other thing that was new to me is that the analysis that these guys can bring to an indoor space is not just about COVID. There's other issues too. There was a German study that Peter might reference a little bit that found, you know, classrooms with closed windows, by the end of the day, kids weren't just getting sleepy from all the CO2 in their classroom. There was actual cognitive decline in their ability to take tests and everything because of the air quality in a room that could have been fixed just by opening a window or addressing the ventilation more. So this isn't just about COVID, but COVID is kind of the inciting incident that brings indoor ventilation spaces into the forefront. The federal government is prioritized a lot of money for this right now. And, you know, I think that we want to be able to eventually access some of those federal dollars. But today we're really talking about what can we do to create kind of prescriptive plans for small retail businesses and agencies that have indoor spaces that they want better data on, and they want to plan. So I don't want to take too much of the time setting the table. So I think we will pass the conch off to Peter to talk about some general ventilation issues. Take it away, Peter.
Okay. Thank you very much, Greg. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm going to share my screen or I hope this works. How does that look?
We still see your slides on the side. You might want to go into presentation mode, but it looks good.
Well,
bottom right, the little screen to your right, to the right, to the left.
oh, I see.
I've got my cursor right over it. Can't you see it?
Here's my cursor. Presentation mode, I don't know, actually. Maybe I should just take that out. How's that look?
No, if you, down on the, to the left of the minus sign on the bottom right, there's 115%, then your plus, then your minus, and then the next little icon to the left of that minus.
Yeah, I don't see those actually.
You know what? This is absolutely okay. You can run with this. I think we can all see your screen pretty well.
Okay, and everyone has the option on their own computer to zoom in on the screen as well.
Okay, yeah, I hope this is clear. I've taken most of your gallery off. Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here. And I've actually been in Port Townsend really for more than 20 years in a way. We built a house here 20 years ago, and I've been at UW for 3 decades. And I graduated from UW a few years ago officially, but I'm still there as an unpaid professor, you might say. But in oceanography and atmospheric sciences, climate change, we study the air and water movement in the large scale. And it seemed natural when the pandemic came to use some of the ideas of turbulent airflow at the very small scale. So I've been trying to do that and learn. It's a big learning curve. And of course, it's a vital experience we're all having, not unlike the one 100 years ago in 1918. And the thing we learned, or my parents learned, my grandparents learned, was that pandemics have long shadows. They don't just go away, and they affect things for decades to come. And this one will do that. And we just have to begin to understand that. So measuring and improving air quality is what I'd like to talk about. And I hope Greg will shake something when I'm droning on too long, but I'll try to do this in about 15 minutes. Contagious viruses and smoke. So virus, it's only recently that airborne transmission of the COVID virus and its variants was understood and believed by, particularly by government agencies, CDC and WMO. But it's real, and it should have been known at the very beginning with the Skagit choir and the massive infections that occur in closed spaces. And all of the closed spaces, homes, bedrooms at night. My mother told me to open the window every night in our bedroom in cold, freezing Connecticut. And she just knew it intuitively, and she was absolutely right, because we've measured what these airflows, these concentrations of contaminants are inside very carefully now, and it's real. So this is a simulation of airflow in a room from an infected person in the lower right corner. Brown is infected air source, and there's a window open blowing it around the room. It's complicated airflow, and the brown becomes—
Sorry, Peter, we're on the wrong slide. We're on day 5, Thursday, May 5th.
Really?
Yes.
How is that? How is it now?
I think you're on the wrong document.
Well, this is
You
really
probably should unshare your screen.
Yeah, I'm going to unshare or something.
And then share, and then you can click on it should bring up a window as to which of your screens you want to share. So just make sure that the one with that first slide is up there.
Oh, I see. I see. Thank you very much, Greg. I'm so glad. How does that look?
Perfect.
The first slide.
Now we see the classroom.
Okay, thank you. I see what happened. So this, to repeat myself, this is a simulation of airflow in a school classroom with air coming in this window. There's an infected student with brown air, brown infected air, and that's been swept around and diluted. And the turbulence can be good and bad. It could carry infection to the next desk or the next desk over, or you could spread it around, but in fact, it dilutes it rapidly. And so it's a good news and bad news situation. You want turbulence there. You want to dilute this air by a factor of at least 500 to get it down to a safe level for the other occupants. So that's a complication, but the other piece of the story really, airborne transmission, is what's happening with virus on small particles called aerosols. They're solid or liquid particles of a millionth of a meter in size or less. And sort of wildfire smoke is another example of small particles, which are very dangerous to health. And this is the whole west coast of the US with Port Townsend in red dot, a red dot, and a brown smoke from wildfires sweeping off into the Pacific. And it's about to come back the next day and sweep back over us and all the way to Europe with very bad air quality. And I lived in England during the London fogs, and I can tell you it's not good. And the trouble is that people get used to it, and they get used to breathing smoky air here when it's really impacting their health. And the commonality here is that both viruses and smoke are carried by these fine particles, aerosols. So real data is really needed. And how much, how long, how intense is this contamination carried by the air? So a very few years ago, people landed on the idea that CO2, carbon dioxide, if you measure it, it tells you how much exhaled breath is present in the air at the sensor where it's measured. And this quantitatively tells you how much human breath has been respired, and that you, in taking another breath, the chances that you're going to rebreathe somebody else's breath, and it might be carrying virus. And in many cases, the human breath is the major source of CO2 in an indoor space. There are exceptions that we're dealing with, propane heaters and wood stoves and respiring plants and things. But so it's how likely the virus is to be, how likely it is that it could be inhaled. And there's the additional thing that CO2 affects cognitive ability and health, even if there were no viruses. So our clean outdoor air is a lot of oxygen, 21%, and a tiny bit of CO2, 0.04%. Yet our human exhaled breath has traded one for the other, and so it's reduced the oxygen and given us 4.5% or 5% CO2 coming into the air. And the other measurement besides CO2 is just the particles themselves drifting in the air, because they're carrying the virus. And so there's a great commonality of these two things, the CO2 and measurement of so-called PM2.5, that's particle mass of 2.5 micrometers or less, very tiny particles that drift with the air and don't fall out. Smoke from fires, wood stoves, wildfires, cooking, trucks, cars, exhaled breath, all these relate. And so we measure both of these, and they're a tremendous thing to have in tandem. The lung is the problem area for this, where the alveoles, I guess I'm not a medical person, but maybe Case Golf could help me here. The very fine extensions where the oxygen is actually taken into the bloodstream, the finest parts of the lung. If soot gets in there, if particles get in there, it does not get washed out as it would in the larger passageways in the lung. So this is why smoking is cumulative. Breathing wood smoke is cumulative danger to health, and so on. So real data is needed. How much, how long, how intense is the contamination carried by the air? And we can measure these precisely over time with CO2 sensors on the left, fine particle sensors, using laser. This is a Purple Air crowd-funded sort of sensor that we use, and it's very good. And then after assessing it, you can do something with portable air cleaners with HEPA, high efficiency filters, and other devices. But these, I think, are one of the winning strategies, and they're relatively inexpensive. In fact, you can build one for about $50 that works pretty well. The commercial ones have extra features. They're computer control and measurement of air quality built into them. So followed by ventilation, followed by clear improvements in ventilation with fresh outdoor air, you can use filtering to remove the fine particles, and it works extremely well. So you can visualize the air that we're talking about in this picture of a thermal image of someone breathing, and the temperature of the air is a good way of tracking the exhaled air. It's not, we're not visualizing CO2 here, but it's a surrogate for that. And this, if you look carefully, there's bright colors here just coming out of this person's mouth, and that's the 45,000 parts per million of exhaled air. That's 4.5%. And we want to get it down to about 500 parts per million, just a little bit above the clear air, 400 parts per million. So that's a lot of dilution, and a factor of 500 will take it down to a safe concentration. In other words, 1 part of this exhaled air to 500 parts of fresh air. That sounds like a stretch, but it actually happens very rapidly, but not rapidly enough to prevent infection. As we know by the statistics, there's no doubt that airborne infection happens, and it's led to, as you know, millions of deaths. So what's the solution? Ventilation is the obvious thing to start with. Up and out is a pretty good strategy. This is an upper level opening with air exiting, and it would be even better if it had an exhaust fan driving it out. They can carry thousands of parts of cubic feet per minute of air out of the room. And if you can bring air in at a lower level, that means air is rising away from breathing level constantly throughout the room, and that's a tremendously good strategy. There are other ideas of where you reverse this and take the air out at the bottom and in at the top. There's argument about which is better. I think this is a good strategy. You can't do this everywhere, obviously. You don't have windows up there, but you can approach it in many ways. And during the biggest problem is that during the cold season, you need to balance ventilating and heating for comfort, and that's a big challenge, but one that can be addressed. So, and then air filtering, once you have done some ventilation, filtering is very possible with those portable units, and with improved filters in the installed HVAC system, HVAC, the installed heating and cooling system in an indoor space, a restaurant, in a school room, in an office, in a home. You can filter with these high efficiency filters, taking out almost all of the particles very reliably. And this is from a wonderful webinar for the EPA yesterday, which I will try to broadcast the link because I think you can watch it. It's 2 hours of incredible information about this problem. And this is pointing out that that in classrooms, for example, if you have these air cleaners, you can reduce the predicted infection rate by 50% very quickly. And other new, the idea of clean air is not very evident through much of the pandemic, but in the last few months, it's getting very evident. Seattle Times had a great article on 1 May, and this is a figure from it that Greg was recommending, that various strategies to clear the air in your home, talking about no ventilation, going to a window open, adding HEPA portable air filters, and then combining with the installed HVAC heating cooling system. And this is getting things down to reducing by 88% to 99% the fine particles there. But it takes time, 4 to 5 hours in this scenario, and that's too long. And I'll show you an experiment suggesting that in a minute. But I'd like to show you what we actually measure here with our CO2 sensors. This is a school classroom, just one day in a school classroom from 9 o'clock to 3 p.m. And the carbon dioxide is the graph, and the clear air 400 parts per million is a lower dashed line, and 1,000 parts per million is often thought to be a safe upper bound for good green, say green healthy air. People, I think it's not so obviously safe at that level now, and we can talk about that at some point, but what this classroom shows is that there's 5 classes here in this day, starting at 8:30 in the morning. Here's one here. Can you see my cursor, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Greg?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure my cursor is absolutely visible. This is the first class from 8:30, and you see CO2 rising quickly. And then the class changes and second class comes in, rises more. Third class comes in until lunchtime. And so it's building up to 900 per million. And then there's a long lunch break, and it goes down with the windows and doors open back to a very safe level. In the afternoon, a class comes in, and whoop-de-doo, it goes up very quickly from one class, 30 students, to above 1,000 parts per million. This is 3 classes with smaller amounts and 1 class with a huge amount. So this is why there's variability in the system, and why measurement and understanding of the complexity of this has to require more data, basically. And because if you summarize the morning there, you'd get very different recommendation of safety and clarity of the air than if you looked at this class in the early afternoon. And so the slopes of these curves going up tell you the rate at which exhaled air is collecting, and that's really good information. You can estimate that from the number of people present in this office or restaurant or school. This is a school. And the downslope, when you empty out a room, is a tremendously valuable measure of the ventilation rate. Here it's about 3 air changes per hour. Safe rate is often said to be about 6 air changes per hour, which is twice as ventilated as this. And there's question about whether it should be even greater than that. And hospitals know this very well. They control these air change rates very assiduously. If you have this is from a British experiment in England, a CO2 in a shared office over 5 days, showing number of occupants. There are 2 to 5 occupants during 5 days. The CO2 rises each day and then wiggles around a lot and then dies at night and comes back the next day. And the risk of infection increases. And actually, these CO2 numbers are not very scary. They're less than 1,000 parts per million and seems pretty safe. However, that's one of the things here is duration of your exposure is one of the factors in infection, and it's pretty small the first day, but you just add these days. If you come in 5 days, you've been exposed 5 times as much, and so these indoor spaces, really the duration and the number of people there are both contributing to your air quality. And the wiggles here are also very important, because that's the question of, are you getting some really high CO2 air that if you're sitting very close to a person in a restaurant or a school. And so this kind of study is rich with data to give you further advice. And Greg mentioned this experiment from 2018 from Karlsruhe, Germany, as classroom with no ventilation at all during much of the day, crowded classroom. And this is, I'm sorry, this is a very complex diagram, but it's 3 days in black, blue, and red, one day at a time here. And if you just follow one of these colors, like the black one, you start at clean outdoor air at 400 parts per million. And in an hour or so, you're up 1,000 more. And in two hours, you're up almost 2,000 more. And then they open the windows and the class changes or something. The next class comes in, it's starting at a higher level, and it gets up to 2,500 or 3,000 parts per million, which is borderline dangerous. This is 5% of the air has been exhaled by someone, and the actual cognitive effect of 3,000 parts per million CO2 is very serious. So this is part of our history of education, and I think everyone I've asked remembers being sleepy in class and not doing that well on an exam. So this is colored in good, moderate, unhealthy, and very unhealthy by CDC and government, trying to decide what's safe, and it's not simple. And of course, ventilation is the major tool we have. Mixed indoor outdoor spaces can be very well ventilated. This is Finn River, tremendously well ventilated, and our measurements there demonstrate that. But there are many places where you cannot do that. So that's kind of the measurement scheme, and something to do with how to ventilate and how to filter. But organizing and funding is really a major question. And we have White House announcements suddenly of a new initiative in March. It was very exciting. The EPA and Private Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Education have very actively promoted new funding initiatives. So the Biden-Harris administration said, let's clear the air on COVID. And in 23 March had a wonderful presentation. You can read on the web the details of it, but it's tied to funding initiatives, American Pandemic Preparedness Plan earlier, and Clean Air in Buildings Challenge, which are more modern. And the American Rescue Plan has $122 billion for schools, $350 billion for state, local, tribal governments. And very clearly, I want to emphasize for local businesses, as well as schools, for nonprofits, for community centers, for upgraded airports and transportation hubs, it's very broad spectrum funding, and it's probably going very fast. I don't know how money flows at what rate in this situation, but some of the larger schools networks that I heard about yesterday, like Boston with 131 schools, they're on top of it because they have a big staff. And this is something that Port Townsend needs, I think, to think about how to get involved with this funding. The EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, talks about the American Rescue Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure funds. And their webinar yesterday, which will be podcast, and I highly recommend it, the URL will be available, talks about this in great detail and actually with guides how to financially become involved in this funding. So, and this is not something you can read as I flick through slides here, but the details of funded measurements and improvements in ventilation and filtration are right there in these websites. And this one has tremendous detail talking about fans and filters and repairing windows, upgrading HVAC installed heating and cooling systems, and purchasing monitors, CO2 monitors and particle monitors. So there's a lot of good stuff out there now, and it's just a question of getting the human power, the human energy and availability to go after this funding. So, and I like the way the CDC under the current government and the DOE, Department of Education, are really laying out things in wonderful detail. Create an action plan, optimize ventilation, enhance filtration, get your community engaged, and then pointing you in the right directions to do this. So that's my spiel, and I can certainly answer or try to answer questions.
I see there's one question, but I think we're a little behind schedule, so maybe we should save questions till we get through Eric and Phil first, if people are all right with that.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Peter. Obviously, there's work to be done kind of on the municipal side, looking to how we can leverage some of these federal dollars. But I'd love to hear from Eric, and I think he's going to be without video. He's at the airport. A little bit about when I got Peter and Phil together to start actually, put our feet on the ground and what can we do for small businesses. Finn River volunteered to kind of be the pilot project. I was wondering if Eric could go into a little bit why Finn River was interested in this, and how the experience has been so far, whether or not you have any prescriptions that make that allay fears or inform actions.
Can you all hear me?
We can, Eric. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I apologize. There's probably going to be a big long airport announcement coming on in the middle of this, and I'll try to be pretty brief. I really, why was Finn River interested? We're just interested in this as part of our community, and as also as business owners, we want to understand what our environment is like in terms of risk for ourselves and our staff and our customers. You mentioned, Greg, the complexities of all this, and it is incredibly complex with a lot of variables, and even having any data point is just so enticing and interesting to us. So we completely understand that, taking a bunch of CO2 measurements and looking at some graphs is not going to be all and end all of anything, but having that data and starting to accumulate that data feels like a really important first step. And is also, I feel like, even having done some very initial studies of a couple of our spaces to get some baseline information, I feel like it is going to help push us and motivate us into the actions of really, it's one thing to measure all these levels, but to then look at the window openings and the filtration and the possible forced ventilation possibilities for our different spaces. I feel like having some data from different locations is going to help us prioritize where we want to make the most effort and put in whatever expenses we want to be able to target those places that we think are either the most problematic or the highest risk. So I just see all kinds of advantages for us as a business in helping us understand what our space is like for our employees and our customers, really. And I just really appreciate you, Greg, shining a light on this, and Peter and Phil bringing your professional expertise to this. I feel really fortunate to live in this community where you all are, hey, we want to try collecting some data. And I know Phil has some interesting things on the horizon in terms of making some of these meters more accessible and more available. And that's also something that is of great interest to us too as a business. So that's really my message is we appreciate you all and the work that you're doing around this issue. We're interested in continuing to participate with you and hoping that other people will also jump in and start collecting more data so that we can share it around and give each other a really clear sense of what our air is like in our workspaces. So thanks for including us. And that is the report from CTAC.
Great. Thank you very much, Eric, and appreciate you taking time out of your travel day. I guess I want to kind of put a little bit of a pin in one thing that Eric said that was backed up by some of the graphs that Peter shared with us, that I think staff safety is something that I'm really concerned about at the county right now, as we have, more and more a super high infection rate. And you saw the accumulation of CO2 in these spaces day after day. And if you have staff are the ones that are most vulnerable right now. And a lot of our bigger spaces have HVAC systems that might have appropriate MERV filters and you can program in the how many times the air is exchanged per hour. And we've had those conversations with our facilities internal, but I just encourage people, there's small things you can do just to make sure that you are maximizing that air exchange and taking care of the staff, right? But now we're running a little bit behind time. So Phil, try to take us through at a clip, but Phil's going to talk about what he's been building and how that might be used in local businesses and schools and agencies. So take it away, Phil.
I'm Phil Pilgrim. I own a business called Bueno Systems. Contrary to popular belief amongst some, I'm not retired yet. I don't ever intend to retire. I design and build electronics, and in the past few years, I've been building CO2 sensors. And with the pandemic, I decided to design a couple that could be used in an indoor or outdoor space for monitoring CO2 levels. I'm going to take you very quickly through how these things are designed and built. Basically, can everybody see the entire screen? Okay.
Yeah, yep. Looks good.
So the electronics are done on what's called a printed circuit board, and that's done in a CAD system. I send the CAD file off to the company that makes the printed circuit board and get back the bare boards. Service mount components go on the board. As you can see, they're very tiny. Those get stuck on top of the board with solder paste. They're put in the oven. The solder melts and the parts are stuck on. The other kinds of parts are called through-hole parts. They're mounted from the top, pins extrude through, come through the bottom, and then it's just soldered with a soldering iron. So then I can plug in all the other parts. There's some programming that has to be done so the microcontroller can talk to all of the other pieces. And then finally, I have to make an enclosure. I have a laser cutter, which I can use to cut out the plastic parts, and then aluminum extrusion, which I purchased. So this is what the finished product looks like. The rest of this is going to be kind of an advertisement for the services that I can offer the local community. Basically, take one of the ambient CO2 sensors, install it at clients' locations for a couple of weeks, bring it back to my shop, download the data from the sensor, run the data through a program that kind of slices and dices the statistics so I can present a report to the client. These are some of the information that I can present. This is just a time series graphed over the 14 days that the sensor was installed. This is from an indoor location, Lucretia's Fine Indoor Dining. This other one is from a semi-outdoor John's Streetery, and I've been alerted by John that this tall peak was when somebody breathed on the sensor. The levels actually exceeded 4,800 parts per million. And then I can take this data and provide some other statistics. For example, which days of the week and which parts of those days provide the higher or lower readings. For example, in Lucretia's Fine Indoor Dining, we have peaks that occur in the afternoon, and it's not so high in the morning. Now this has, for each of these time slots, there are a whole bunch of readings. And so I've sorted the readings. The black line is the median reading for that time slot. And then the red and the green are at the extremes of the, what you might call the bell curve. So you can see the difference between the indoor and outdoor readings are quite significant. Another way to show the data is by hour of the day over multiple days. Again, I'm plotting the 90th percentile, the 50th percentile, which is the median, and the 10th percentile, which is the lower extreme. And you can see that in the indoor situation, the levels continue to climb during the afternoon and into the evening. Outdoor, not so much. It stays pretty constant because of the ventilation.
Hey, Phil, can I ask one quick question of context? I just want to make sure I'm correct in remembering that this is actual data, but the names of the businesses have been changed. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so this I consider to be the most telling statistic, and what I can do is get the hours of operation from a company's website or from the proprietor, and then I can separate the data into bins. One bin where the business is closed, the other bin where the business is open. And you can see that when this business is closed, most of the concentration is in the lower readings. But when it's open, you see the concentrations extend further out. The outdoor venue concentrations stay pretty low. There's not much to report there. So I've come up with a price for my services, and this is what I'm offering, to place one of these, either the big meter or the small meter, at a client's location for 2 weeks, bring it back, analyze the data, and produce a report. And for that, I would charge $379 plus tax. And here's my contact information for anyone who's interested. So I want to thank Greg and the chamber for making this possible, and Peter for laying the groundwork. My presentation, I guess, is more of an advertisement than anything, but I hope that the local community can benefit from my services.
Thank you, Phil. You can go ahead and stop sharing, and appreciate you going into it. Of course, we are looking for public money to supplement this program as well. But I think that we had one question in the chat that I want to make sure that we get to, and then I think we would probably be best served by just opening it up for questions or comments from the audience. So Jay asked if ceiling fans have much of an impact on how much CO2 is in a room. I don't know, Phil or Peter, do you want to take that on?
Peter would be best to answer that.
What kind of fans? This is
Like a ceiling fan?
oh, ceiling fans. Yeah, ceiling fans have a mixed record, because if you're ventilating to move air upward away from breathing level, the way I outlined as a possibility to keep it as safe as possible, the ceiling fans will actually be bringing it back down again. And so that's questionable. It's not necessarily bad, depending on the circumstance. And I think that, you know, I outlined the fact that turbulence is both a friend and an enemy here. It spreads possibly infective air around, but it also dilutes it and making it safer. So it's a battle between those two. And ceiling fans are ambiguous. They can take you the wrong way. And I think it has to be more measurements have to be done. And I have not made that specific study, but I would not recommend them as a precautionary principle.
Thanks, Peter. Case.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really remarkable presentation. I appreciate that. I think it'll be very useful. I live in an eco village where we have 30 adults and 12 children, and we're just building a common house. What recommendation would you have if we wanted to have a relatively expensive but reliable CO2 monitor, so that we could occasionally see, you know, what is our ventilation level, and how much more do we need to open the windows?
You're interested in the specific recommendations?
Yes, like, can I just go down to Henry's Hardware and get anything off the shelf? Or
no, that's a very apt question, because the market is deluged with CO2 monitors, and some for $30 or $50, and a lot of them don't work very well. I mean, I don't think you need for, let's say, home use or in out in the field use, you don't need fantastic accuracy. You want reasonable accuracy. And I think I keep looking for this. I think the Aranet that Greg has is testing well. There are very few people that are actually testing these. But the price range seems to start at $200 a unit for high quality instruments. The ones I have are $600, and they get quite expensive, but we're looking for more accuracy than you need. So I'm giving you a very ambiguous answer, but stay tuned, because this is an issue I'd really like to address. Phil probably should mention his take on cost and accuracy.
So I did order a couple of the cheap CO2 sensors from Alibaba. They were $30-some a piece. They had beautiful displays, multicolor. They were junk, total junk. And I ended up just throwing them away. So you pretty much get what you pay for. One thing that you need to be aware of if you buy a CO2 sensor, it does require occasional calibration. They do drift a little bit. And that's one reason that in general, I'm not offering to sell my CO2 sensors. I would rather rent them and provide the additional services that go along with that.
I want to jump ahead to Sherry's question, then we'll go back to Catherine, because I wanted to kind of point this out too in response to the last question, because HEPA filters are another critical thing for your community room case. You should, up and out is the general idea for ventilation, and that I really encourage that May 1 Seattle Times article that had that one slide that Peter shared about the effectiveness of, again, layered mitigations. The HEPA filter and open windows are super effective. And reading that Seattle Times article can go into more detail about the effectiveness of open windows plus HEPA or HVAC. And I'll read the question from Sherry. Given the complexity of considerations, can you rank the effectiveness of open windows, HVAC, HEPA filters, both in the presence and absence of smoke or particulates outside? So Peter or Phil, anything to add?
Am I on the air?
Yep.
Yes, Sam. It takes a long answer because it's very complex. And the advice when we have wildfire smoke is go indoors and close the windows, right?
Yeah.
But we've found that actually does not really work very well, because most houses, even modern ones, are infiltrated with outdoor air. Even though you can't smell smoke indoors, it's there. And so that smoke is a different issue than virus. I think the HEPA filters are tremendous. And one thing I would point out is that exhaust fans are very inexpensive. And for example, Brian McGriff, working at Sunfield Farm Schools, we were making measurements there, and he took double fans that must cost, I don't know, $20, $30, $40, and made plywood templates for them. And those clean out an interior space very quickly. And if it's not too cold and you can stand the temperature, an active exhaust fan is a really good thing. But stay tuned and follow up resources. Like I have a website that talks about these things, and I'm very happy to share a longer story about this.
Yeah, one other thing you can do for smoke, it's very inexpensive, is to take a box fan and get a HEPA furnace filter and put it on the intake side of the fan. You don't even need to tape it on, the vacuum will hold it on. And I've done that, and it does clear out the smoke from a room fairly quickly.
Yeah, and all the particles that are carrying virus too. So it's a double win, basically.
I think everyone can see the comments in the chat, right? We've got a nice one from Catherine about schools and from Linda. I don't think there was a question, but I mean, yeah, we're working on wider implementation of this and looking to create a service. It's the difference between do you buy one of these CO2 monitors, or do you compile a data set with a service like Phil's or through another method? And I think that's, I guess, what I want to amplify a little bit is there's some expertise that goes into it. And I think this is the kind of thing that a lot of businesses the service to just come up with a prescription for a space might be the first step.
A sort of a rule of thumb, we're learning as we go here, because we've never had a pandemic before, but it seems like a 2-week deployment of a CO2 sensor in your indoor space will give you a lot of information. Now, you have to realize it matters whether it's cold or warm, whether it's windy or not windy, and whether it's crowded or not crowded, and how long people are in that space. Duration of exposure really matters. And all those factors add complexity, but somehow a sweet spot seems to begin to appear with a couple of weeks of deployment. And that's not going to be too expensive. And Phil outlined how that can be done.
Great. And our contact information, I think, was on the materials, or we can certainly get it to you. I'll answer Case's question quickly. I got an ARENET 4, ARENET, and I got mine off Amazon for $250. I think it was $200 2 years ago. So, and it's I take it everywhere with me, and I find it, it's not this data set, but it's a data point. And I was like, time to open a window, and I use it all the time that way, kind I guess prophylactically. Any other, we're almost out of time, but I want to see if anyone else has a comment or question they'd like to bring up. All right, seeing none, I'll just kind of amplify Linda's comment from the Port Townsend School District. It's great. I'll be at the senior symposium next week myself, and I know that Peter has been working with at least one student's senior project was building a CO2 monitor and starting to, seed this kind of industry into our young ones, because ventilation issues are not going to go away, and a recognition of our indoor spaces. I'm trying to get the Clean Air Agency to start looking inside and not just outside. Oh, yes. Let's see.
And just to let you know, we're going to send out everybody's contact information, put a document together with slides and graphics and contacts for everyone, and get it out to everyone who registered for this cafe.
Great. And then one more question, I think we'll have to wrap it up. Do residential and commercial building codes address CO2?
It's a new ballgame, I think. They're very respected and skilled engineers working with the schools, for example, on heating and ventilating. And CO2 is kind of a new ballgame for many of them. And I think it's emerging, but it's not in place uniformly. And I think we're in our little town here, we've been doing the same kind of research that is going on all over the country, and it should be and it will be, but I don't think it is now.
Right, ventilation is certainly in commercial building requirements, and residential often, that's been getting houses tighter and tighter and tighter for efficiency, and some of the ideas, maybe those ductless heat pumps aren't the cure-all that they've been kind of, because they are very small carbon footprint, but they do not create that ventilated space that where we know is important now too. So it kind of, the landscape is changing under our feet right now. Well, I think we're at time, so I don't see any other active questions. Arlene will get everyone's information on the website out there, but I really appreciate your all interest in this, and Peter and Phil and Fen River, thank you for your help in kind of getting this going. I think it's really important work.